The DNA, they said, would solve everything. We've examined the contaminated crime scene. We've dissected the ransom note that reads like fiction. But there's one piece of evidence that's been held up for nearly 2 decades as the definitive answer to this case. DNA. In 2008, Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacey wrote a letter that changed the public narrative overnight. She declared that new DNA testing had exonerated the Ramsey family. That touch DNA found on JonBenet's clothing matched an unknown male profile in the Cody's database. That this profile, she said, belonged to the person responsible. The media ran with it. Headlines proclaimed the family's innocence. The case, many believed, was essentially solved. They just needed to find the man whose DNA was in the system. But here's what happens when you peel back the layers of that proclamation. When you examine not just what was said, but what was left unsaid. When you look at the testing that couldn't be reproduced, the DNA that actually saturates the crime scene, and the convenient omissions that shaped a decade of public understanding, the DNA evidence doesn't exonerate the Ramsey family. It does the opposite. And the story of how that truth was buried, how a prosecutor's letter became accepted fact, despite contradicting the forensic record, reveals something troubling about the distance between what we're told. Act 1. The Exoneration. July 9th, 28. More than 11 years after JonBenet Ramsey's passing, District Attorney Mary Lacey sends a letter to John Ramsey. The letter is formal, official, typed on a letterhead, and it says something that will reverberate through this case for the next decade and a half. The DNA results, Lacey writes, are powerful evidence that supports your family's long-held belief in your innocence. She goes further, to the extent that we may have contributed in any way to the public perception that you might have been involved in this crime. I am deeply sorry. An apology from the District Attorney's Office to the primary subjects of a homicide investigation. This wasn't a private correspondence. This was a public statement, released to the media, covered by every major news outlet, presented as a turning point, the moment when science finally cleared the Ramsey family. But what was this DNA evidence that prompted such a dramatic reversal? In 2008, the Boulder DA's office sent several pieces of evidence to Bode Technology Group, a private forensic lab in Virginia. They were looking for touch DNA, trace amounts of genetic material left behind when someone handles fabric or other surfaces. The focus was on JonBenet's long johns, the pants she was wearing when her body was found. Using new, more sensitive testing methods, Bode analysts scraped the exterior waistband of those long johns. They were looking for skin cells, epithelial DNA, that might have transferred when someone pulled the pants up or adjusted them. And they found something. A mixture. JonBenet's DNA, as expected, but also contributions from what appeared to be one or more males. More significantly, the male DNA profile they developed was consistent with a profile already in the Cody's database, the FBI's combined DNA index system, which stores DNA from convicted offenders and crime scenes. That profile had been uploaded years earlier, in 1997, from DNA found in JonBenet's underwear. It had been labeled as an unknown male and entered into the system in hopes of finding a match. Now in 28, Bode was saying the DNA from the long johns matched that unknown profile. To Mary Lacey, this was proof. The same unknown male's DNA was on both the underwear and the long johns. 2 separate locations, 2 separate pieces of clothing, same person. Therefore, she concluded, an intruder was present, an unknown male who left his genetic signature on JonBenet's clothing. And since the Ramsey family members' DNA didn't match this unknown profile, they must be innocent. Case closed, or so the letter claimed. The media explosion that followed was immediate. Ramsey's cleared by DNA new evidence exonerates family. Unknown male DNA. For years, the Ramsey family had maintained their innocence. They'd appeared on talk shows, written books, given interviews, all insisting that an intruder took JonBenet's life. And now, finally, they had what seemed like scientific validation. John Ramsey appeared on television shortly after the letter was released. Vindicated, emotional, grateful that his family's name had finally been cleared. Patsy had passed away in 26, 2 years before the exoneration letter. But her memory, John said, could now rest easier knowing the truth was finally recognized. Burke Ramsey, who had lived under a cloud of suspicion for years, was now publicly cleared by the district attorney's office. The narrative shifted. The intruder theory, which had been losing ground as more investigative details emerged, was suddenly back at the forefront, bolstered by DNA supported by science. But there's a problem with this narrative, a significant problem, because when you look at what the DNA evidence actually shows, when you examine the testing that was done, the results that were found, and the conclusions that were omitted from that letter. Act 2. What they didn't tell you. Let's go back to 1996, December 26th. The crime scene is being processed. Evidence is being collected. Among the items taken are JonBenet's underwear, the pair she was wearing when her body was found. They were several sizes too large for her. Investigators noted this immediately. They didn't fit her. Someone had dressed her in underwear that wasn't hers. When the underwear was tested by the Denver Police Department crime lab, analysts found something in the crotch area, a mixture. JonBenet's DNA, as expected, but also contributions from what appeared to be a male. The male DNA was extracted, analyzed, and uploaded to the CODIS database as an unknown male profile. The hope was that someday, someone would enter the system whose DNA matched, and investigators would have their person. For years, this DNA was held up as the key to the case. The killer left his DNA, advocates would say. Once we find him, we'll have justice. But here's what we've learned since then. And here's what Mary Lacey's letter didn't mention. In 28, when Bode Technology was asked to retest the underwear, an email from Bode analyst Amy JonBenet, dated February 28, states clearly, I was told, read that again. The analyst could not reproduce the original DNA mixture. When she tested cuttings from the underwear crotch area, she found only JonBenet's DNA. No indication of a mixture. No unknown male contribution. The DNA that had been held up as definitive proof of an intruder, the profile that had been in CODIS for over a decade, couldn't be found when the same evidence was retested using more advanced methods. This is a critical detail, because it suggests that the original unknown male profile may not have been as robust as investigators believed, that it may have been a partial profile, degraded, difficult to interpret, that when subjected to more sensitive testing, it disappeared. But Mary Lacey's letter doesn't mention this. Instead, it focuses on the long johns, the new finding, the touch DNA on the exterior waistband that matched the CODIS profile. And here's where we need to understand what touch DNA actually is and what it can and cannot tell us. Touch DNA is exactly what it sounds like. Genetic material transferred when someone touches a surface. Skin cells slough off constantly. Every time you handle fabric, open a door, pick up an object, you're potentially leaving trace amounts of your DNA behind. Touch DNA technology has been revolutionary in forensic science. It's allowed investigators to develop profiles from evidence that previously yielded nothing. A fingerprint on a weapon, a hand on a steering wheel, skin cells on clothing. But it has limitations. The biggest limitation is this. Touch DNA is easily transferred, from person to person, from surface to surface, through completely innocent contact. Think about a piece of clothing. From the moment it's manufactured to the moment it's worn, how many people might touch it? Factory workers who assembled it, quality control inspectors who examined it, warehouse workers who packaged it, truck drivers who shipped it, store employees who stocked it, customers who browsed it, checkout clerks who scanned it, the person who bought it, the person who washed it, the person who folded it. Every single one of those people could potentially leave trace DNA. And that DNA can persist. It can survive washing. It can transfer from one garment to another in a laundry basket or dryer. This is called secondary transfer, and it's a well-documented phenomenon in forensic science. So when Bode found unknown male DNA on the exterior waistband of JonBenet's long johns, the question isn't just whose DNA is this. The question is, was it deposited the night JonBenet passed? Or was it there from manufacturing? From the store? From a previous washing? We don't know. And we can't know, because touch DNA doesn't come with a timestamp. What we do know is this. The Bode analysts themselves expressed reservations. In their communications with investigators, they noted that the DNA profile was a mixture, that it included JonBenet and one or more male contributors, that the profile was consistent with the Cody's unknown, but that the evidence was limited. They did not say, definitively, that this DNA came from the person who took JonBenet's life. They said it was consistent with a profile that had been in the system since 1997, a profile that, when the underwear was retested, couldn't be reproduced. And yet Mary Lacey's letter presented this as exoneration, as proof of innocence. From a forensic criminology standpoint, this is troubling, because DNA evidence should never be interpreted in isolation. It's one piece of a larger puzzle. And when that puzzle includes a contaminated crime scene, a ransom note with the mother's handwriting, and extensive family DNA throughout the evidence, you can't simply point to one unknown profile. But that's exactly what happened. Act 3. DN. That actually matters. Now let's talk about the DNA that doesn't make headlines. The DNA that was found all over the crime scene. The DNA that came from people we know. People who were in that house. People whose presence needs to be explained. Family DNA. Let's start with the black velvet blanket. This blanket was found in the basement, on the floor, near where JonBenet's body was discovered. It was tested. Serology, the study of bodily fluids, showed the presence of semen. When DNA analysts tried to extract a profile from the sperm cells, they failed. The sample was degraded or insufficient. No usable DNA could be developed from the seminal fluid itself, but epithelial DNA, skin cells, was found on the blanket, and that DNA matched John Ramsey, or a mixture of John and Patricia Ramsey. Now, this blanket reportedly came from John Andrew Ramsey's room. John Andrew is John's son from his first marriage. He was in Atlanta when JonBenet passed, so he's been ruled out as a suspect. But here's the strange part. John Andrew's DNA is not on this blanket. If it was his blanket, from his room, where he supposedly slept when he visited, why isn't his DNA on it? We shed millions of skin cells a day. If you sleep under a blanket regularly, your epithelial DNA will be all over it. That's basic biology. But John Andrews' DNA. John and Patsy's DNA is. So whose blanket was it really? And why was it in the basement with JonBenet's body? Then there's the Barbie nightgown. This nightgown was found in the basement, near JonBenet. According to Patsy, it was supposed to be in the laundry on the second floor, in the washer or dryer. But when it was tested, investigators found something interesting. Burke's touch DNA on multiple locations. The shoulders, the front, the bottom front and back. Burke could not be excluded as a contributor to that DNA. Burke, who told investigators he went to bed early and slept through everything. Burke, who supposedly had no contact with JonBenet that night. Why is his DNA on a nightgown found in the basement near his sister's body? There's also physical evidence on the nightgown itself. Small amounts of urine, small amounts of blood. If the nightgown was in the laundry, already washed or waiting to be washed, why does it have fresh biological material on it? Unless it wasn't in the laundry. Unless someone brought it to the basement that night. Unless Burke had recent contact with it in ways that need explanation. Then we have the pineapple bowl and the tea glass. The bowl of pineapple, with milk mixed in, a specific preference, was found on the kitchen table. Patsy's fingerprints are on the bowl. The glass of iced tea, completely empty, was found next to it. Burke's fingerprints are on the glass. Both items were found in the breakfast nook, placed between the seats where Patsy and Burke normally sat during family meals. This tells us something simple but critical. Someone in that family made this snack. Someone sat at that table. Someone ate pineapple and drank tea. JonBenet's autopsy showed undigested pineapple in her stomach and small intestine. She ate it within a couple of hours of her passing. But John and Patsy both claim JonBenet went straight to bed when they got home from the party. That she never woke up. That she never came downstairs. So how did she eat pineapple? And why can't anyone in the family explain it? When police asked about the pineapple, they got evasive answers. Patsy claimed she didn't recognize the bowl. John said he didn't know who would have made it. Burke, in his interviews, stumbled over the question, gave inconsistent responses, seemed uncomfortable, but the evidence is clear. Someone made that snack. JonBenet and the people whose fingerprints are on the bowl and glass are Patsy and Burke. From a behavioral analysis standpoint, the family's refusal to acknowledge the pineapple is telling, because it's a small detail, easily explained if the explanation is innocent. Oh, JonBenet woke up. That's all they'd have to say. But they don't say that. They avoid it. They deflect. They act as if the pineapple is dangerous, something that might unravel their timeline. And they're right, because if JonBenet was awake and downstairs eating pineapple, then she didn't go straight to bed as they claim. Then someone in the family was with her. Then the timeline changes. And changing the timeline means changing the story. Act 4. The DNA double standard. Here's the fundamental contradiction at the heart of the DNA exoneration. We're asked to believe that sparse, touch DNA from an unknown male. DNA that couldn't be reproduced when the underwear was retested. DNA that appears on fabric in trace amounts easily explained by manufacturing or transfer. But at the same time, we're told to ignore the extensive family DNA that saturates the crime scene. John and Patsy's DNA on the black blanket found near the body. Burke's DNA on the Barbie nightgown found in the basement. Patsy's fingerprints on the pineapple bowl. Burke's fingerprints on the tea glass. John's DNA, or a mixture of John and Patsy, on exhibits that can't be explained away as casual household contact. If we're going to take DNA seriously, if we're going to say that genetic evidence matters, then we have to apply the same standard across the board. You can't say unknown male DNA is significant while dismissing family DNA as meaningless. From a logical standpoint, which is more likely to be relevant to a crime committed inside a home? Trace DNA from an unknown source, possibly transferred through manufacturing, shipping, laundry, or any number of innocent contacts. Or DNA from people who were in the house that night, whose fingerprints are on items connected to the victim, whose genetic material appears in locations that require explanation. The answer is obvious. And yet, for over a decade, the unknown male DNA has been treated as the key to this case, while the family DNA, the DNA that actually tells a story, has been downplayed. Think about the double standard being applied here. When unknown male DNA is found, it's immediately attributed to the person responsible. The intruder left his DNA, we're told. This is proof. But when family DNA is found, it's dismissed. Of course their DNA is there. They live in the house. It's normal transfer. Except it's not just normal transfer. It's DNA in specific locations. On a blanket found near the body. On a nightgown brought to the basement. On a snack prepared shortly before JonBenet passed. These aren't random, ambient DNA deposits. These are contact points, moments of interaction that need to be accounted for. And the family can't, or won't, account for them. Mary Lacey's exoneration letter relied on a narrative that says, if there's DNA from someone outside the family, then the family must be innocent. But that's not how forensic science works. DNA is evidence. It's data. It needs to be interpreted within the context of everything else we know. And the context here includes a crime scene contaminated by the family's own actions, a ransom note written on the mother's notepad with the mother's pen matching the mother's handwriting, a timeline that doesn't make sense unless someone in the family is lying, behavior that speaks to guilt rather than innocence, lawyers hired before the body was found, interviews refused for months, stories that change over time. DNA doesn't exist in a vacuum, and a single unknown profile, especially one that couldn't be reproduced, that exists only in trace amounts, that could have been deposited at any point through innocent means, doesn't outweigh the mountain of evidence pointing the other direction. From a philosophical perspective, we have to ask, what does it mean to be exonerated by DNA? If someone's DNA is not found at a scene, does that prove they weren't there? No. Plenty of people commit actions without leaving genetic material behind. If unknown DNA is found, does that prove an outsider was responsible? No. Unknown DNA can come from countless sources unrelated to the event in question. Exoneration requires more than the absence of DNA. It requires evidence that affirmatively rules someone out. And nothing in this case affirmatively rules the Ramsey family out. In fact, the preponderance of evidence, the totality of what we know. The unknown male DNA is an anomaly, a trace finding that may or may not be relevant. But the family DNA, that's consistent, that's extensive, that's in locations that matter. And the fact that a district attorney chose to focus on the anomaly while ignoring the pattern says more about prosecutorial discretion than it does about the evidence itself. Ending ding. We were told that DNA would solve this case, and in a way, it has. Just not the way Mary Lacey's letter suggested. The unknown male DNA, the profile that was supposed to exonerate the family, that was supposed to prove an intruder took JonBenet's life, couldn't be reproduced when the evidence was retested. It vanished under closer scrutiny, but the family DNA, that's still there, everywhere. On the black blanket found near her body, John and Patsy's skin cells, but not the DNA of the person whose room the blanket supposedly came from. On the Barbie nightgown found in the basement, Burke's DNA on multiple locations, despite his claim that he slept through the night and never interacted with his sister. On the pineapple bowl, Patsy's fingerprints. On the empty tea glass, Burke's fingerprints. These aren't accidents. These aren't innocent transfers. These are points of contact that tell a story the family has refused to tell. They said the DNA would clear them, and when it didn't, when the testing revealed more questions than answers, they leaned on a prosecutor's letter that misrepresented what the science actually showed. Mary Lacey exonerated the Ramseys based on DNA that couldn't be reproduced and touched DNA. She ignored the DNA that was actually significant, the DNA that required explanation, the DNA that pointed, consistently and undeniably, toward the people who were in that house. From a forensic standpoint, the DNA in this case doesn't exonerate anyone. It raises questions. Questions about why family DNA saturates a crime scene that was supposedly committed by an outsider. Questions about why Burke's genetic material is on a nightgown found in the basement when he claims he was asleep. Questions about why John and Patsy's DNA is on a blanket near their daughter's body when they claim an intruder was responsible. The DNA doesn't lie, but the people interpreting it, the people deciding which DNA matters and which doesn't, they can shape the narrative in powerful ways. For over a decade, we've been told that the unknown male DNA is the answer, that it proves the family's innocence, that once we find the man in the system, we'll have justice. But the unknown male DNA is a distraction. The real answer is in the DNA we've been told to ignore. The DNA from the people who were there, who had access, who had time, who left their genetic signatures all over the evidence, and then hired lawyers to make sure no one could ask them why. In the next episode, we're going to examine the one person who's been protected more than anyone else in this case. The person whose DNA is on the nightgown, whose fingerprints are on the tea glass, whose presence that night has never been fully explained. We're going to talk about Burke Ramsey, and we're going to ask the question no one wanted to ask. What if the person responsible wasn't an adult at all? What if the truth is darker and simpler than anyone wanted to believe?